Welcome to the Student Success Podcast. If you work in higher ed and want to learn ways to support students, check out today's episode.
If rigor, whatever that means, matters to you as an instructor, your grades really need to reflect student understanding and not compliance. I don't care if they know week 4 how to use the chain rule to take a derivative. If they figure it out by week 6, I'm still happy, right? Like they've still shown that they've met that standard. And so then you realize, okay, there's this whole world of standards-based grading that values this learning progression and where students end up as opposed to where they are at that moment and maybe how they were feeling on that particular day that they took a quiz. That idea of just like, oh, I don't think I care about. I mean, obviously I need it by a certain time because math builds on itself, right? So I might have to have some cutoff for when they have to learn it, but maybe it doesn't have to be so rigid.
Welcome to the Student Success Podcast, Kelly.
I'm happy to be here, Al.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a math faculty member at San Diego Mesa College, where I've been lucky enough to also be part of our teaching and learning team. We have this Mesa's ongoing support for teaching, our MOST team, which has been really fulfilling. And then I've also worked on some stuff at the district level in terms of OER, open educational resources. It's been nice to be able to do a little bit more than just teach math, but also help other educators realize things like zero textbook costs in their classes and how to do anything they want to do in their classes, really. Like working on course design overall has been really fun.
So I've been a fan for a while. I would check your notifications for your social media, and I've been to at least one of your webinars. And one of the things I appreciate about you is that, in my view, you center kindness in your craft. You truly, genuinely care about students, and you do this by so many ways, but I really appreciate how you are always looking to continually improve your craft and then sharing that with your colleagues. So for today's episode, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about what you do in the classroom, and it could be whatever you want. And I'm sure that, yes, it's going to be math, but we have so many listeners from different disciplines. It doesn't matter. They're going to learn something from you because you're a teacher at heart. You know, we use the word faculty in higher ed. I still kind of like the word teacher. But anyway, love to learn about some of the things you do in the classroom.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think when you say kindness, I think of like, I don't know, like that's not what I think is happening in my class necessarily. I think it's more just caring about students as a whole person. And I guess that is kindness, right? To want to know what students are interested in, what they're doing in their lives, what things they value. Thinking about your comment about just like following folks on social media, that's part of what has like made my journey the journey that it has been is the folks that I've followed. And thinking about this brings me back to like a really old Dan Meyer post on Twitter, like 1,000 years ago. I mean, I have no idea how old this is, but he basically said that his teaching journey started with phase 1, I want to show students the brilliance of my thinking. And then like phase 2, I want to show students the brilliance of math. Phase 3 was finally to this point that I think I'm finally at in my career, which is I want to understand the brilliance of your thinking. Like no longer centering themselves, no longer centering even the content, but more the students thinking about that content. In my classroom, I feel like that looks a lot like me stepping to the side. I do a lot of what I realize now is probably putting my students in that zone of proximal development, if you want to like use fancy terms, right? Where I'm constantly giving students problems that are just beyond what we've talked about in class, just beyond what they've previously seen, and putting them in this sort of space where they have to get used to being uncomfortable and not knowing, and then seeing what resources they have both within themselves, like what do I know, and then what do my like peers know, like how can I solve this problem. It highlights their brilliance, right? It highlights that they can do things that are beyond what they've seen before. And then I do ask them a lot of questions about themselves. I do really try to value their progression in their learning by doing things like reassessments and giving them options when I think things don't need to be an exam to how would you like to show me you understood limits in a calculus class? Like, I don't think that that needs to be an exam. Here are 4 options for how you could show me that you understand this. And then if you think of something better, feel free, pitch it to me. Like, I'm happy to have you create something that you feel like is something that showcases what you understand.
That was beautiful. Zone of proximal. Oh, I haven't heard that in so long. And a lot of the quality research around pedagogy comes from our K-12 brothers and sisters. So we learn a lot about that there. And also, there's a lot of really good research around productive struggle in the sciences, especially math. So I would love to learn, if you wouldn't mind, could you give us an example of that productive struggle? If you have with a particular math problem or concept or topic, just to kind of unpack that a little bit more.
I'm trying to think, what were we doing in class today? So in class today, I've just taught Calc 2. Today, I would not say was a great example. We started with simple problems and then we just kept adding more and more complexity to them. So it wasn't like, it was more of what Peter Lillijal, there's this whole building thinking classrooms. You mentioned K-12. I feel like I have learned so much more from K-12 than I have ever learned from I'm sorry, from the higher ed folks in terms of teaching, because they actually have time and like to do all this PD, and that's part of what they're like really assessed on, I think, as teachers and evaluated on. There's so many brilliant ideas from them. But one of those ideas, which is now gaining a lot of traction in higher ed, is the building thinking classrooms movement of Peter Lillijal's. The way I think he frames this is thin slicing. So you have students, and this is what happens in my classroom. I have whiteboards all around the room, and students are randomly assigned to a group, and they go to those whiteboards. And I have Google Slides that just have math problems, essentially. Usually it'll start with math problems they've seen before, and then they'll slightly transition to things that are beyond what we've seen, but still right at the cusp where I know that they can add something to it, and they can get there. And so he calls that thin slicing. A lot of us might call it scaffolding, but I mean, that's all students being in that zone of like just putting them right in the, like, you don't know this, but you have to actually think and pull out all the information that's in your brain. And when they're at the whiteboards, it's really lovely because they can like look over and see another group start and get an idea that maybe, oh, I should do that. Or like see that some other group has a different answer and then try to compare and contrast and do some of those metacognitive strategies that you just can't accomplish with a lecture, right? Like you can't show students all the possibilities and have them make mistakes and try things in a lecture quite as beautifully as you can in this like thinking classrooms approach.
Oh, Kelly, that sounds like a lot of hooey. You're not preparing our students. They're gonna fail. There's no rigor in what you're doing. You're, I'm so disappointed in you. You're not preparing them. So that was my worst sarcastic voice ever, but I think you get the idea. How do you respond to that?
So this is one thing when I run professional development and webinars for math faculty, I think we tend to make dichotomies of things that are not really dichotomies, right? Like the lecture versus active learning. And anyone you talk to who's an active learning advocate, right? Someone who's doing similar board work, this, some people call it 360 whiteboards. Some people call it like non-vertical, like whatever, non-permanent vertical spaces is the thinking classrooms language for it. They usually, almost everyone I've talked to who does that has using a flipped classroom. They have videos that they want their students to watch. Almost everyone I've heard present on this, they're doing play pause it. And so they're requiring their students to watch those videos and providing points for watching those videos outside of class. So those faculty are still lecturers at heart, right? They're still wanting their students to see an expert speak about the actual math. And then when you talk to a lecturer, right? I have a lecturer down the hall, a good friend and a colleague of mine, and I listen to him talk to students, and he'll tell students, you need to go home and practice this. You need to do like just problem after problem until this becomes, and that faculty member is also an active learner. Like they're telling their student, you need to engage in active learning. And they'll even be like, explain it to someone, like any friend, a dog, just find someone to explain the math to, and you'll understand it better. The way I teach is I'm doing both. I don't lecture as much as somebody who might be lecture based. I provide a lot of that outside of class. But also, I find that if you let students play with the ideas before you lecture, you don't need to explain every possible situation. And when you're comfortable knowing that your students are going to be successful with questions that don't look exactly like the ones you've done, you don't need to do every single iteration. Because I think when I first started teaching, I really believed I have to show them every possible thing that might happen. Like my lecture has to cover everything that could go wrong. And now I'm like, I don't need to show them everything. I need to give them the tool and then the tools to understand what to do when things fall apart. I think there's that false dichotomy there of like, oh, if you're having them work on stuff, you're not. But I don't grade my students on that classwork. Their only grades in my class are based on understanding. So their grades are solely based, I mean, I'd say 70 to 80% are quizzes and exams, things that they have to do in front of me with, maybe no notes, things like no formula sheet, none of that. I've heard from colleagues who teach the higher level classes, who teach physics, that my students, even my C students, are doing really well in those classes. So I think I'm doing something right. I'm doing something right, even if it sounds fluffy.
No, you are. And I want to touch on grading then, right? The way you assess, because and look, in the same way I don't have a student deficit mindset, I don't have one for faculty because it's how they were trained, right? This is how they learned in graduate school, and they then pass on a lot of those, I'll call them antiquated practices, but they don't, because that's all they know. And so and grading has been an issue, right? I did a little study at a college that I coach. I work with the researcher, and it was really fascinating. We did a survey of how faculty in pre-calculus grade. Long story short, after all these questions of how they weigh and how they don't, do they drop a test or not, we saw that it's basically a lottery for students. So if I'm lucky enough to take pre-cal with Kelly, I will probably have an 80%. But if I'm not lucky enough to have Kelly and I have this other instructor who weighs things differently, who's more about points than the learning, he or she may not know that, but that's really what happens. You're going to have like a 40%. I mean, the data was fascinating. And so tell us a little bit more about how you assess learning.
Yeah, so I'm really influenced by Josh Eiler, Jesse Stommel, Robert Talbert, David Clark, all these kind of big names that thankfully I ran into early on Twitter when Twitter was still Twitter. I've had a lot of opportunities to read the book Grading for Equity with different reading groups, like different groups of faculty. So I read it with a group of just statistics faculty as part of the electronic conference on teaching statistics. I read it with faculty here at Mesa. And there's just so many pieces and points that Joe Feldman makes that really resonate. And that one of them is grading on understanding instead of compliance. And to me, if rigor, whatever that means, matters to you as an instructor, your grades really need to reflect student understanding and not compliance. So like I have still like a little bit of a visceral reaction when those really amazing faculty were telling me how they require their students to watch those play pause it videos, and they're giving points for those play pause it videos that count towards their grade. Because I'm sitting there going, but like that's just, did they watch the lecture? Like yes, but they should be intrinsically motivated to watch that lecture because they want to come to class and know what's going on and be able to engage with what we're doing in class. For me, not every student is going to find me the best teacher for them, right? Like and maybe video is not the best method for them. Like maybe they know that they'd much rather, they're me, they'd much rather just read some text and be able to scan. And it's a lot harder to scan a video, right? A video is a set amount of time, even at 2 times speed, that I have to sit through. Whereas like I can scan a PDF, try a problem, see my understanding and move on. There's no real universal design for learning, right? In the way that these other faculty are doing that. And the same thing for homework, right? Not every student needs the same number of practice problems. Not every student needs the same type of homework, right? Sort of realizing that a long time ago, especially because there was a big movement in like K-12 to like not assign homework grades, and I think that was one of those moments where I was like, I never liked homework as a student. I never needed to do all of it. It all it did was lower my grade because I refused to do it. And we all, like all of us as faculty members, I'm sure have had the situation where you have a student who turns in all the homework and still fails the test. And you have the student who turns in like none of the homework and aces the test. And so you know there's no correlation between the homework and the test scores, like the understanding score. Whether the test is a good measure is another question. And so I think that was the first thing that resonated with me of that book was I need to get rid of all the things that are grading compliance, grading students just doing things, and focus on do they understand. Another huge piece, and this all of this he does with nice little examples in grading for equity of like two different instructors, sort of what you talked about, the Kelly versus the not Kelly, like the lottery of going into a class of like what matters is that they learn the thing. It doesn't matter when they learn it. And so when you go, yeah, that's true. I don't care if they know week 4 how to use the chain rule to take a derivative. If they figure it out by week 6, I'm still happy, right? Like they've still shown that they've met that standard. And so then you realize, okay, there's this whole world of standards-based grading that values this learning progression and where students end up as opposed to where they are at that moment and maybe how they were feeling on that particular day that they took a quiz. That idea of just like, oh, I don't think I care about. I mean, obviously I need it by a certain time because math builds on itself, right? So I might have to have some cutoff for when they have to learn it, but maybe it doesn't have to be so rigid. Was a really big idea that resonated with me. So, and then I've been lucky enough to go to the Grading for Growth conference that they do online every summer a couple of times, and having a bunch of folks who've experimented with this and can kind of tell you if you want to go into the ungrading or alternative grading world, there's no right way to do it. And you can take little bits and pieces that work for you. So for me, from standards-based grading, you come up with all your standards that you want students to be able to do. And then you decide, okay, what is my metric? Like some folks are like, I need them to pass a standard twice. I need them to show me not just once that they can do something, but twice. Or is it just once? Finding those standards was a fun activity. I was actually lucky enough to be in a community of practice, a faculty inquiry group with other faculty where we came up with our whole like list of topics from calculus. We came up with the things that we actually like were our standards by like ranking everything as E is like they just need to know its existence. This is all based on Maria Anderson's work. It's an ESIL framework. I'll get you all these cute references. E is like existence. I just need them to know this exists. I don't need to ever assess it, but I should probably mention in a lecture. They might need to see it. S is they need to be able to do it. So they can do it with support. So this might be on a homework or a group quiz or a project, something where they can go out and get some support. They could use AI if they want. You can use their peers, a tutor. I'm fine with that. I just want to know that they can do it with support. I is independent. So something I want to know that you can do independently. So this is going to end up on a quiz in my class or an exam. And then L is lifetime. I need you to have this skill for the rest of your life. Like this, you got to know these things. And those need to be like on all of the things, right? And then probably a final exam. But we ranked as a group, we ranked all of these ideas in our calculus class using that framework and then sort of had a discussion when there was a disagreement, when we weren't all aligned as like, oh, this should be just existence. And then that person who was kind of off would maybe sell us on why. Like Regina Abbiati was in this group, and she had rated the epsilon delta proofs, this precise definition of a limit, which I think across the board we had all done existence. She had put supported, and we were like, justify this. And so she was like, let me explain what I think this is really important. It's their first formal definitely. And so she's explaining it and we're like, okay, we're not convinced, but maybe I'll move a little bit that direction next time. I don't know. But all those things that we said ended up as our standards. And then we decided those are going to be our quiz questions. We're going to quiz those every week. And then we'll reassess them the following week. And those reassessments are not going to be the same. I'm going to make my students do a slightly harder problem. I'm going to maybe change it up a little bit so that they're not just looking at my key, memorizing and regurgitating a procedure, but they have to really show their understanding in that second attempt. And then since I teach supported calculus, I actually give my students a number of attempts because for me, I have students coming in with really varied skills. And so I can't assume that, after 2 weeks they're going to get something down. It might take them a little bit more time going back and reviewing material. But that's just the only thing I do standards based on my quizzes. So it's an interesting idea that I'm still doing these weighted grades because I'm kind of it's uncomfortable to move away from something you've used for so many years. But I'm just doing one little pocket of it as the standards based where I'm doing these reassessments and letting students show their growth in that one section.
Oh my gosh, that is so beautiful. And the unfortunate part about higher ed is it can be such a lonely profession. And you had the space to do this activity with your colleagues and create this standards-based grading. Oh my gosh, I wish that can happen everywhere. So I have a question for you because when Twitter went to this hellscape, a lot of educators moved over. It was funny because you would think isn't this a platform for jobs? And no, not really. It's become much more than that. There's a lot of educators that moved over to LinkedIn actually. And it was funny because I saw one of your posts going to a particular college to do some kind of engagement with math faculty. And I wrote as a comment, I said, I don't know if you remember, I said, oh, were you able to leave unharmed? Right. And the reason I say that is because I've been put as a coach and as a facilitator in spaces with math faculty. And boy, they can be so effing brutal. And here's the thing, right? So you have this group of faculty like you, right, that are willing to try things, right? They understand that our institutions are not only places of learning for students, but they're places of learning for us. Like you're trying some stuff, right? And then you're not ready yet to like overhaul your weighting. That's fine, but you're doing things, you're right, little bits and pieces here and there, right? And I don't know if there's a right answer to this. I have an idea of how to do it. I've done it over the years, but I'm wondering your perspective. What do you do when it's always the same people that go to the PD who are willing to change, but you still have a significant percentage, or even if it's only one faculty member, that's one faculty member too many that just don't want any of it. They're still going to do what they're going to do. And is there a way to help those faculty to kind of bring them on board? Do you have any experience of something that might have worked?
I will say, as a facilitator, when I work with a campus where I know there's going to be faculty who are not in the camp, right? Like the Luke Wood and Frank Harris used to have this like 4 quadrant thing of the like you have your allies, you have your choir, the people who know what to do and are doing it are your choir, are willing to do it but don't know what to do, they're your allies. And then like there was like the resistors, like what do you do with that group of faculty that's just resisted? They don't know what to do and they also aren't really willing to change. And I think the only thing you can do is, as a facilitator, hopefully you're in a space where the department has brought in everyone, right? Like you actually get them to show up. And I think for me, part of that is doing PD within spaces that they're already there, right? Like making that a regular part of your department meetings, of your school meetings. Too often it's not, and our school meetings and our department meetings are just completely informational. And so we're losing the space where we get people who are not going to ever sign up to show up to a here's how to teach, right? Or here's an idea for teaching. And then I think once you get these people in the room, a lot of it is just putting them in the shoes of a student. So for me, I tend to have a bunch of really fun math problems, whether it's the open middle questions that Robert Kaplinski has on his site, or a card sort, or something that's more of like a puzzle meets a math problem, or just a really interesting math problem that you lead off with. You'll find the resistors kind of open up because we all fell in love with math. We all love math, right? Or whatever the heck we might be talking about. And so when you give them that puzzle, they just naturally kind of become a student and see, oh, well, this could be fun. And then if you can tie it to the curriculum of like, okay, here's how I use this in my calculus class. Here's how this is like a really good lead off. And if you keep it something tiny too, like a lot of the I did a whole blog post on like warm up routines. And I think if you can do something that you're going to be like, this is only going to take 10 minutes of your class time, a lot of faculty will kind of buy in on this idea of all I have to do is 5 minutes. And I thought it was fun. Like if you have them participate, you sell them on it's not like overhaul, like it's not doing the whole thinking classrooms. You don't have to give up all the control and let your students go to the boards, right? I think those things help a lot. And then letting faculty really have space in those places to voice concerns, because I think too often as people who run PD, we go in and we're just like, here's the right way to do things. And we don't really acknowledge that this is the way I do things and it works in my class and these constraints, and it might not work in your class. Like if you have reasons you think it's not going to work, let's chat about them, because I can't problem solve things that you don't get to vocalize. Right? You're just going to internalize, "Oh yeah, this doesn't work for me," and you're just sit back and not have a conversation. So giving folks that space where they're not taking the whole room down. So giving them a way to share, maybe in a smaller group setting, maybe in an asynchronous, like, or not asynchronous, but like a separate like note taking space is a really nice way to be able to hopefully bring them in. But like I think you need to treat those faculty as experts, right? You're doing something amazing. Let's pull out what you're doing and have that conversation. I mean there are some that are just it's never going to move. We know that. I mean, the tenure is a problem.
Yeah, that's the reality, right? That we have to realize that some won't change, and some campuses, what they're taking drastic measures to work with counselors to make sure that, especially our most disproportionately impacted students, don't go to those sections. I mean, I'm telling you, that's actually happening.
No, I know.
Oh yeah. So, and here's the other thing. Again, it's higher ed. It's not really set up for us to be learners as educators. So I work with campuses where they actually don't have department meetings anymore. So they've lost that space. In some ways, I understand it, because it used to be just these meetings that you're talking about that could have been an email, right? But now there's zero settings. And all they rely on are these once in a year, the beginning of the school year. They're often called flex days, and every campus has different, right? Some campuses have 1 day of flex. You get your PD for 1 hour out of the year, and you better like go do something with it, right? And then you have campuses that have an entire week dedicated to that, right? That's the difficult part. And I think if we can somehow embed in our practice, I don't know, this may end up being contractual, but can we build a community of practice where we meet almost at least bi-weekly, where we just discuss our craft, what we're doing, what works, what doesn't, and we're not pointing fingers. One of the things that I love, way, many moons ago when I was doing my doctoral work, I wanted to know what other countries were doing. And I became very interested in Japan, because faculty there do something, you might have heard of it, called lesson study, and they actually take the time to observe each other teach. This is such an un-American thing to do, right? Like,
Like a non-evaluative observation. Like that's the key, right? Like this is not part of the evaluation process. It is just let's go like see what the other people are doing.
exactly. And so the way they frame it, I think it's so important, is that they're not there to evaluate the person, they're there to evaluate the practice. I think that's such a beautiful way kind of to frame it. But in the United States, are you crazy? We can't even get our department meeting to talk about teaching and learning, let alone observe one. And although I got to tell you, I am working with a campus, and that is what they're doing. Their math department put together a formal, they call it Learn from Your Peer program, and we came up with this whole schedule of opting in faculty who want to observe other faculty. And so, but that's rare.
Yeah. Well, it's something that does exist in the US in K-12, right? I think they call it like pineapple charts or something. There's some weird name for it.
At first I used to call them data teams, because I have a background in K-12, right? And years ago, I used to visit these data teams, and I go, oh my gosh, come on, people. Because all they would do is look at data all day long and never actually do anything with it, right? And they are PLTs, professional learning teams. That's what they call them in K-12. And they try to do what I tell you. But again, sometimes without the right facilitation, without the right process, it ends up being kind of complaining sessions. But yes, you're right. They do some of that. But in higher ed, it's just rare.
I know it is rare. And it's something we wanted to get off the ground here as like our most team, because we do a asynchronous coaching option that we call 3 ideas, and the idea are capitalized for instructional design. And what happens in that situation is we, three of the most coaches, get put into a development shell of a faculty, and we just give them 3 ideas. We each give them an idea for how they might change their course that what we think would help students. And that's it. And they can take them, they can leave them. It's like a non-evaluative, like we just provide you some feedback. Here's what I would do. I might reorganize the modules this way, or I'd consider using the transparent assignment template, or whatever we want to suggest. And then that's it. And we really wanted to do something like that with like the actual on-campus classes, like invite coaches in and ask them, because even as part of that 3 ideas, you can put what you want feedback on. If there's something in particular, like I'm really interested in, like, is my course accessible? Can I get accessibility feedback? But I can imagine doing the same thing in my class of like, hey, today I'm doing this board work. I'd love for someone to come in who's not me and look and say, like, are there students who are not engaged? Like, are there, like, is there something I could do better? Like, could you give me some feedback on like what you're seeing? Because I'm only one set of eyes, and ask for that sort of information, like, would be really, really helpful. But we just never got that off the ground this semester. This is probably our last semester with that team, because we're completely block grant funded, and we're, out of funds. And so we'll see what happens in the future. But I do still think that some version of that is like the right way to open up the conversation about teaching.
I think so. I really wish we can structure that somehow. And the fact that you had a grant, right? That it's not embedded in our practice is a problem, right? It's a challenge. I want to ask you about how can we be pragmatic about closing the loop on PD. So I mentioned earlier, some places it's a one-time shot. Here's a brown bag lunch PD. Try this out, or your 3 ideas. My pet peeve has always been, well, how do we close the loop? How do we know that they actually did something? Can we do a simple reflection form? It's not evaluative. We just want to know your reflection on how it went. Like 3 questions, right? What did you try from your 3 ideas? How do you think it went? What evidence do you have of how it went? And what would you do next, right? So, and it's not about, oh, well, you should have done it this way, or gosh darn it, you should have done it that way. It's just a learning, right? Closing the loop, because we really don't know if people are doing the things that they learned in PD. Do you have any suggestions on how we might be able to close that loop? That's another challenge in higher ed.
Well, and I like that you didn't, I mean, you call it a loop, but like you actually said as one of the tasks, like, what would you do next? Like, so that you are making it iterative, right? You are making this a reflective teaching process about how are you going to continue this, or how would you refine it? Like, maybe it doesn't work. Like, what are you going to do next? I mean, for that 3 ideas, we do actually have a close the loop where they can, to get their flex credit for it, they have to like submit that basically reflection, like, hey, what did you change, type of a deal. In most of our like workshop offerings here, like, I would say probably not in workshops. That's a little bit harder to close the loop on, because those are so one off. You're just hoping that somebody gets a good idea, right? Like, if anything, you maybe are asking them in your evaluation survey, like, what's something you're going to try based on this? Why do you think it's going to make an impact? What support might you need to make that a reality? So just a quick little, what's going to be changing, was this the right level for you too? But for most of our cohorts, at the end of each module of learning, they have to post something that shows where they were originally, right? Like, so here's this week in our humanized course. Right now we're doing a humanized course, and this week is all about student to student interaction online. And so one of their options is to improve a current discussion board. And so faculty have to post what the original discussion board was, what idea they were inspired by within the content of the week, and then what their updated discussion board looks like now that they have infused that idea. So that might be providing options for replies, right? Instead of just saying reply to two students, it's, when you reply, here's what I'm looking for. I'd like you to, provide another example of what they're talking about, or I'd like you to contrast that with what you said. Or whether that's just making their discussion board more authentic in general, having students tie something back to their real life. So those to me, and they're like, not only are we closing the loop, but like these faculty members are getting something that they can immediately put into their course. Like they're not doing busy work, right? They're kind of right away having something that they can change in their course. And so that's something that's part of those bigger cohorts that we run. I think it is hard though, for like, how do we do that in something that's more one off, right? That's more of a workshop, right? We're running a community practice right now, and every week it's sort of a like, we're just sharing ideas. And you've got me thinking now about like, okay, how do I have us close the loop on what we learned the previous week? Like, did you take anything away? What were the changes you made? Because it's happening, we're just not capturing it necessarily. Like our first like meeting, a bunch of folks were inspired, like, oh, I love the idea of a card sort. Oh, I love this idea of, one of our faculty shared plickers, which are the, yeah. And so another faculty member was like, oh my gosh, I love the idea of a plicker, because again, he's more of an old school lecturer, but this example that she provided is like, it takes you like 3 minutes to do a plicker activity, and now you have an idea of where your students are in terms of an understanding on something, and then you can launch into your lecture. And so for him, it was a no-brainer, and he was super excited about it. And the very next meeting was like, can I actually share about plickers? And so and the things he had made between the 2 weeks between our meetings. So it's really hard with one-off things, but I think with the other pieces we can close the loop on what we're doing.
I want to ask you about issue in STEM of equity gaps. They tend to be a bit more stark in STEM when you look at the data across the country. Depending on the in the year, I work anywhere 60 to 70% with faculty. That's my jam. I developed this inquiry and action process. The Community College Research Center recently featured it, just a brief Q&A. And this is about taking a group of faculty to, they come up with a homegrown practice, and I call it a treatment. We're going to try this treatment. We're going to be scientists, and we're going to do these things, and we're going to come back and actually look at student work and make the connection between some sample student work and what we said we were going to teach. And we asked the question, the strengths that we see in the student work, what do you think our instruction led to that? In addition, if we see some continuing needs in the student work, what can we do with subsequent instruction, right? And in this work, what I'm finding, when we elevate our practice, when we continually improve, it doesn't happen all the time, but in this so-called all students approach, when we try to elevate our pedagogy, I have worked with faculty that closed equity gaps. And I'm wondering if you have experienced that. And I know it can vary by year and section, but have you experienced that by bringing your pedagogy, your assessment to this level, that you have significantly reduced or closed gaps from your experience?
So I haven't looked at my data in a bit, but I would say I would hazard to guess that I have reduced but not closed, right? I still think that those equity gaps persist. And some of those it's more institutional, right? Or like just structural. These poor students are overcoming other life hurdles, and it doesn't matter what I do in my class if a student is unable to make it to class for whatever reason that might happen. But I will say, I think letting students, valuing students' thought process and showing them that they belong in the field, like, or that they matter, their ideas matter in the field, is a huge key to reducing those equity gaps, especially in STEM. Because I think too often when we do that, what Dan Meyer said were his first two phases, right, to bring that back, of focusing on my ideas or focusing on maths ideas, my ideas and maths ideas are pretty white centric, right? I mean, it's pretty Eurocentric in general. And so, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's about connecting students' ideas to like, okay, your ideas are beautiful. We just need to add all of this communication that is really, it's just learning a whole new language, math. And so, why does it matter that we do these things? Like, let me explain why this communication matters, why what you wrote could be ambiguous and why we would need to clean it up, but like all of your thinking is brilliant, right? Like having that moment to sit there with a student and be able to say, hey, you're doing great things, to do that cheerleading, that yes and of like, this is some good work and we could improve it, right? I think really helps students see themselves in the material. in ways that I can't do when like every single math thing is named after some European dude, or like I'm a white woman standing at the front of the room. I can't make a student feel like they belong in any way other than letting their voice be heard, making sure that they realize that the things that they're saying are really smart, right? Like like they're doing great math. I think that that's the key, is like not only letting students see their own brilliance, see that they belong in the subject in that way, but also believing that students can belong. Because I think too many faculty have a deficit mindset in STEM of like who can be prepared, who, and it's like, I mean, if you come in with that mindset, of course they're going to struggle. Like you have to believe that your students are capable of doing this. At least until they proven to you like 10 times that they're not, right? Like it just, but make them prove to you that they can't, as opposed to making them prove that they can, which I think is where the mindset that most faculty come from, is this like, well, and then they only end up teaching to those students who are well prepared. And that's not many of our students in this day and age, not with the COVID learning gaps, not with, AB 1705 and AB 705. Like we have students who are missing some of these skills that we're used to them having. And we just need to believe that they can overcome that and learn those skills as they also learn the course material, and let them make the mistakes so that we can actually discuss and have those moments to say, oh wait, here's why we can't do that thing you just did algebraically.
Yeah, no, and you're right. Equity gaps are stubborn. I have to sometimes remind some of my colleagues who work in at the university level. They're my theorist buddies who get mad. Actually, they gotta close them. I'm like, hey, look, we can work on what we have control over. We're gonna elevate. We're gonna our pedagogy. We're gonna rethink. But these gaps are stubborn for what you mentioned, right? It's funny. Just the other day, I was looking at the 3-year completion rate for one college versus another, right? So this particular college has something like a 9%, right? And by the way, we can say, oh, well, they're part-time, they're mostly part-time. Well, the 6 years not that much better. And then another college was like 35. Here's the thing. The institution that had like a really low, it's in a super, super economically depressed zip code, right? And the other college was in a very, very high income area, right? So I don't want to make excuses when we have, a 10% and just blame it all on, oh, well, it's the zip code. But there is the reality that there are things we cannot control that happen to these poor, disproportionately impacted students. It makes our mission at these institutions that are in these kinds of zip codes that much more critical, mission critical, if you will. And by the way, when you're in a very, very high income area and the highest is 35, that's still not the best, right? So, in fact, I'd love for some research to come out there. Maybe the RP group will do it. I'll ask them. I'd love to see where you have higher completion rates
No.
in those very economically depressed areas, because if we can find those, we have so much to learn from those campuses and what they're doing, right? So the point of me saying this is, yes, equity gaps are stubborn, and two, context is important. We can't just look at the data and think that, oh, the faculty there must be so much better. By the way, I know these two campuses, and no, they're not. They're not. As we wind down here, Kelly, do you have any other parting thoughts about your journey, your continuous journey that you would like to share?
No, I would say one thing that came out the other day, I was part of a panel at an accessibility week session. And one of the questions was asked is like, how did you end up learning as much as you've learned about accessibility? And I think you can replace that with grading or active learning or what, insert topic. And the other folks were like, oh, I went to a lot of workshops. Oh, I went to a lot of webinars. And for me, yes, I've done that. But I think most of the learning that I've had that has been the most impactful is finding those voices that are into the thing that I'm curious about and following them on some sort of social media, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's, even Instagram or Facebook or, Blue Sky, whatever it is, finding wherever you are already, have that trickle in all the time is really, it makes you constantly think. It makes you a more reflective person, and it gives you those little ideas that maybe in that moment you're not ready to do, right? I think back to like, I think one of the biggest impacts of like my teaching was I was at a workshop and seeing a bunch of really great stats activities from Roxy Peck, and I raised my hand. I was one of those stubborn pain in the ass faculty members that I hate now as a facilitator. No, I don't hate me, but I was like, how am I supposed to do this with a 3-unit stats class? Like, I can't even cover the curriculum. Our curriculum is a mile long. I cannot cover stats curriculum and do these activities are fabulous. I'm not gonna. They're great, but I can't do it. And in that moment, most everyone else in that room had a 4-unit stats class. So they all just sort of went, well, I don't know how you do it in 3. I have 4. And at the break, my friend Mbika, who taught at College of the Canyons, where this was, came over and she's like, you got to flip your classroom. She's like, the only way you're able to do this stuff is if you flip your classroom. You got to put your lectures online. So you can actually make time for this. I didn't do anything in that moment, but the next semester I was like, I think I'm going to try this. Like, I have this like pile of activities for stats and I can't use them. I'm going to try to flip my class. Not only putting yourself in a space where you're going to get ideas constantly, but also surrounding yourself with people who are going to make you question and like who will tell you the harsh truth of, you're going to have to do work if you want to do these activities. You're going to need to flip your classroom. Because I think when you surround yourself by people who just tell you you're doing great, you don't see any reason to improve, right? Like who do everything the same as you. Find those folks, right? Who maybe you can both push each other to be better. And then just realize this is all reflective work, right? It's all iterative. It's all thinking about like, okay, that went well. Could it have gone better? Did it go well for every student? Being really intentional as you look around your class and seeing, especially if it's not like thinking about that disproportionate impact, who is not actively engaging in this class and how could I fix that? Because I think too often we focus on the students who are actively engaging, right? The ones that are smiling and nodding or giving us their input or chatting, and we don't pay attention to who's not talking and sort of why, and really figuring out ways to interrogate that.
So outside of education, unfortunately, there's so many stereotypes. You hear it all the time for K-12. Oh, well, they get to work from 8 to 3 and they have their summers off. And they have no idea that when you are a good teacher and you care, you're putting in 70, 80 hours a week. And the same thing in higher ed. Oh, well, they just teach 2 semesters. They can have the summer off, no winter session, whatever. But when you take great care, like you, to continually improve your craft, to take this teaching and learning as a profession, I see it really no different as a doctor. But in society, we elevate, we think doctors, right? Well, I mean, right, it's important. They try to keep us healthy, right? Although, in my opinion, they give us too many drugs. There's other ways. Like, can we just eat better sometimes? Anyway, I'm not gonna go there. Point is, I think teachers, faculty, that profession, that teaching profession is so difficult. It is so difficult, and people outside of education don't really understand that, but yet rewarding. I said in the beginning that I was a fan, and I'm even a bigger fan now that we've unpacked what you do, Kelly. Thank you so much for participating in the Student Success Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Al.
Thank you for listening to the Student Success Podcast. You can subscribe to the show and newsletter on the Continuous Learning Institute link below, and of course on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.